In case you don't know who I am, my name is Paula Gooder, and I'm the Canon Chancellor here at the Cathedral, which means that I look after all the learning and theology that takes place. So this kind of event is what we do in my department. And now, it gives me the greatest pleasure to introduce our speaker for this evening. Biblical scholar and womanist theologian, the Reverend Wilda Gafney, PhD, is the Right Reverend Sam B. Hulsey Professor of Hebrew Bible at Brite Divinity School in Fort Worth, Texas. She is the author of a woman's lectionary for the whole church and translator of its biblical selections, and Womanist Midrash, a reintroduction to women of the Torah and of the throne. Very excitingly, as I'm sure you all know, the second volume of that is coming out later this year, and we're all waiting with great anticipation for it. She is an Episcopal priest, a former army chaplain, and a congregational pastor in the AME Zion Church. She describes herself as a preacher, teacher, activist, and somewhat intriguingly, an amateur watercolourist. If you want to tell us about that, please feel free. Really, I like to think that I do a lot, but reading your biography makes me feel really tired. So wonderful to hear about all the things that you're doing. It is such a pleasure and an honour that you have agreed to speak to us this evening. Please join me in welcoming Professor Gafney.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for that wonderful, warm welcome and the gift of your time. Thanks to Canon Paula, to Dean Andrew, to tour guide Sophie, and everyone else who made this happen. Two small addendums to the program. Immediately after I've agreed to take a photo with the Black clergy, let's come immediately, organize, and do that. And following that, I'll do a photo with those Black theologians, students, and faculty, and we'll do that after the clergy photo. As Canon Paula indicated, my second volume of Womanist Midrash, a reintroduction to the women of Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings, is coming this fall. Among the entries are a chapter on the fate of Jephthah's daughter, a chapter on the Queen of Sheba using Islamic sources along with those from the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, the Kebre Nagast, chapters on Rahab, Deborah, Yael, widows, wise women, sex workers, the ghost master of Endor, and many, many more. Tonight, I will do some readings. Something popped out somewhere. We'll find it later. Hannah and her daughters. 1 Samuel, chapter 1, verse 9, and of course, all of these translations are my own. Hannah rose after they had eaten and drunk at Shiloh, and stood before the Holy One of old. Hannah's soul was embittered as she prayed to the Holy One, and she wept profusely. Then she vowed a vow and said, Holy One of heaven's armies, if only you would truly look on the affliction of your slave woman and remember me, and not forget your slave woman, but give to your slave woman man seed, that I will give him to you as a Nazirite all the days of his life until his death. He shall not drink wine or strong drink, and a razor shall not go upon his head. And it was as she prayed more before the Holy One, Eli was observing her mouth. Now Hannah, she was speaking in her heart, only her lips moved and her voice was not heard. And Eli deemed her a drunkard. And Eli said to her, How long will you remain drunk? Put your wine away, woman, away from you. Then Hannah responded, and she said, No, my lord, I am a woman whose spirit has hardened. I have not drunk either wine or strong drink, and I have been pouring out my soul before the Holy One of old. Do not take your slave woman as a worthless woman, for I have been speaking from my great grief and anger all this time. And the Holy One attended Hannah, and she conceived and gave birth to 3 sons and 2 daughters. Some of the text that I translated came from corrections based on the Dead Sea Scrolls, but I'll not go into that tonight. The story of Hannah exists to introduce David through the story of her son Samuel. Yet Hannah is more than the woman who gives birth to Shmuel. She has her own story, and her legacy endures in the scriptures and beyond. While the text begins with Elkanah, Hannah's husband, and his distinguished pedigree, the narrative actually follows Hannah. It is her story, and her husband is a character in it. Hannah is one of 2 women with the same husband. While polygamy is permissible in the Hebrew Scriptures, it seems to be class-based. The vast majority of men who are described as having more than one woman are wealthy, high-status patriarchs. Elkanah's 2 wives suggest he has some means. Hannah's infertility in relationship with her husband's other woman, Peninnah, is contentious, evoking the discord between Rachel and Leah and their use of their slave women as surrogates in Genesis. As a barren woman, Hannah is a biblical stereotype. Agricultural language like fertile and barren was used to describe women in a literal, not metaphorical sense. The ancient world did not know of barren men. Castration and deformities were a separate category. While people were aware of semen and its general role in procreation, the ancients believed that male seed contained his future offspring stuffed inside each other, and women were the ground in which they were planted. Remember that humanity would not see spermatozoa until the 17th century, and the ova was not observed until the late 19th century. In 1876, Oscar Hertwig advanced the then controversial theory that conception required material from both egg and sperm. Hannah's barrenness was understood as comparable to soil in which a plant will not take root. It was presumed to be the fault of the woman/soil and not the plant/seed or the man from which it issued. The authors and editors seem not to know of agricultural seed that has molded or blighted and extended that to men's bodies. Complicating the presentation of barrenness in the scriptures is its use as a theological trope. In the Jewish and Christian scriptures, barren women are nearly always transformed into fertile women by the miraculous power of God. This is in distinction from other miraculous acts, healings, resurrections, multiplications of foodstuffs, etc., which, while spectacular, are infrequent in the scriptures. This is also contrary to the experiences of women outside of the scriptures. While some women experience inexplicable reversal of infertility, it is far from common and certainly not universal. Infertile women outside of the scriptures must live with their infertility without the miracles of scripture, and sometimes with the disdain for and heartache of infertile women in the text. Contemporary knowledge of human reproduction does not shield women from being blamed for either their biology or reproductive health. Despite Hannah's story being at odds with the experiences of most ancient or contemporary hearers and readers, it remains powerful. Her desperation and persistence in prayer transcend time. In the beginning of 1 Samuel, Hannah is an object in the story. The narrator speaks about her and her husband speaks to her. However, the text does not tell us how Hannah came to be married to Elkanah. Was she his first wife? Did Peninnah come into the picture because of Hannah's infertility after some years had passed? Or was Hannah a second wife brought into the family after Peninnah had already demonstrated her fertility? Peninnah has at least 4 children if daughters and sons in 1 Samuel chapter 4 is taken literally. That is, at least 2 of each because of the plural. When the women are introduced in 1 Samuel 1:2, Hannah is identified as the one and Peninnah as the second. In any case, Peninnah is presented as Hannah's adversary. Her action towards Hannah and Hannah's responses to them are described without Peninnah uttering a word. In contrast, Hannah takes over her own story in verse 9 and following. Hannah gets up, Hannah feels, Hannah prays, Hannah vows, Hannah prays repeatedly, Hannah speaks, and Hannah has a conversation with Eli. She has more active verbs and more dialogue in the narrative than does her spouse, Elkanah. The text says that Elkanah loves Hannah, but does not make the same claim on behalf of Peninnah. Neither does the text say that Hannah or Peninnah love Elkanah. This is consistent with the breadth of the Hebrew Scriptures in which men love women and women are loved. The single exception in terms of romantic love is Michal, who loves David in 1 Samuel 18:20. Hannah joins Rebecca in Genesis 24:67, Rachel, Genesis 29:18, and also verse 30 of the same chapter, Delilah, Judges 16:4, Ma'achah, 2 Chronicles 11:21, and Esther 2:17 as the express object of her man's love, all expressed with the verb ahav. Elkanah expresses his love and caring for Hannah by trying to get her to eat when she is too sad or too depressed to do so. Elkanah is distressed that his love is not enough for Hannah. He claims that she means more to him than 7 sons, but of course he has children, and she does not. The notion of love between men and women in the heteronormative scriptures is one of the characteristics that transcends the temporal and cultural framework of its context when other aspects, such as polygamy, are seemingly less familiar. It is not clear how long Hannah and Elkanah have been married and trying to have children. The text indicates that years have passed in 1:7. Neither is it clear what Hannah prayed prior to this. Peninnah's taunting her every time she goes to the Shiloh sanctuary suggests that she knew Hannah was praying for children there. See chapter 1, verse 4. One can easily imagine that she prayed regularly for children at the sanctuary, and that her prayers were more than an annual occurrence. The place of Hannah's prayer, Shiloh, is significant because it is the home of the tent of meeting, the Israelite shrine that housed the presence of God during the Exodus and the wilderness wanderings. Prior to the construction of the Jerusalem temple, the Shiloh shrine is the only place on earth where it can be said that God dwells there. Hannah and her family are regular worshipers at the sanctuary. Judges 21:19 mentions an annual festival at Shiloh. Since Samuel follows Judges in the traditional canonical order, the festival may be intended here, as 121 mentions an annual sacrifice. However, the text does not mention a festival, so it could have been on any occasion when Elkanah sacrificed. Years of infertility have taken their toll on Hannah, accompanied by anguish and torment, including watching her husband have children with another woman, a woman who diminishes her at every turn because of her infertility. Hannah makes a vow and places the onus of her fertility on God, whom she addresses as the sovereign of the multitudes of heaven. For Rashi, this address contrasts the infinite number of God's heavenly creations with the one child for which she prays. The Nazirite vow that she takes upon herself and makes on behalf of her hoped-for child corresponds to the Torah in Numbers 6. In her vowing and praying, Hannah crafts an innovation that would change Israelite religion and its daughter religions, Judaism and Christianity. She prays privately, believing that God can and will hear the prayers of her heart. This is revolutionary. The practice of the time was to pray aloud to ensure God could hear the petitioner. Even with theological poetry that God knows the human heart, there was no public or private prayer that went unvoiced. until Hannah. Taken aback by what he sees and having no frame of reference to help him interpret her actions, Eli the priest calls her a drunken, muttering woman. In response, Hannah does more than explain herself to Eli. She instructs him in her Torah tefillah, her prayer teaching, or her Torah, in verse 15. Then Eli blesses Hannah and also blesses her prayer request without knowing what it is. She never tells Eli about her vow. Hannah refuses to allow Eli to act as her intermediary with God. When Hannah returns home, she is no longer sad. What has lifted her spirits? Was it Eli's blessing, or was it her own experience of prayer? The divine response to Hannah, articulated as the Holy One remembered her, is similar to the response of God to Rachel in Genesis 30:18. Unlike Rachel, who demanded that her husband provide her with children, which he could not do, Hannah has asked for her child from God. That Hannah's story continues after the production of the longed-for child is also comparable to Rachel, in that Hannah becomes a matriarch through her portrayal in 1 Samuel. There is a tenderness in Hannah's raising of the young Samuel, which is missing in the birth narratives of most biblical characters. Comparison could be made with Revd, Moses' mother, in her care to save his life and in her efforts to ensure that she was the one to nurse him in Exodus chapter 2, verses 3 and verses 9 through 10. Hannah devotes herself to the care and nurture of baby Samuel, so much so that she does not go to the Shiloh sanctuary to worship with her husband Elkanah. Of course, Hannah could care for Samuel at home, on the road, and at the sanctuary. Her decision to stay home with Samuel, and it is her decision, seems to reflect her need to keep him to herself because she has vowed that she will give him to God in the care of Eli. Hannah tells her husband what she has decided, and his response indicates consent, though she does not ask his permission. His response in verse 23 is curious because he invokes the divine name to affirm either the words of God or the word of Hannah. Elkanah's invocation of a divine response is peculiar in the scriptures. The NRSV defers repeatedly to the first scroll of Samuel found in Cave 4 at Qumran. However, it fails to do so in verse 23. The NRSV has, "May the Holy One establish the words," the Qumran scroll is, "May the Holy One establish the words of your mouth," referring to Hannah using the feminine singular, versus what the NRSV has based on the Masoretic text, "May the Holy One establish his word." Because God did not speak to Hannah during her prayer, there is no word of God to be confirmed. Hannah did not speak to God, and it is her word that is confirmed when God answers her prayer. The expression establishing a word is quite rare. It's the verb kun, and it's only found in 1 Kings chapter 2, verse 4, 2 Kings chapter 23, verse 24, and 1 Chronicles 17:23. In none of these is the word of a woman established by divine response. It is also Hannah's word that she will keep her vow and bring Samuel to Eli when she is finished weaning him. The text does not say how long Hannah nursed Samuel. Josephus and 2 Maccabees 7:27 state that 3 years was the traditional age at which a child would be weaned. Rashi places it at either 22 or 24 months. Did then Hannah nurse Samuel for 3 years? Or did she nurse him longer in order to spend more time with him? After a gap of an unspecified amount of time, certainly years, Hannah brings the young Samuel to Eli as she has vowed. She also brings a 3-year-old bull to sacrifice, correcting against the Qumran text again. Hannah alone in the Qumran text and with someone else, likely Samuel and Eli in the traditional Hebrew text, worshiped the God who answered her prayer. In addition to her sacrifice, her worship took the form of a psalm that she composed and chanted in chapter 2. Perhaps she had previously composed it for the occasion, working on it while nurturing the son she would soon surrender. The power of Hannah's words in this psalm is attested in their use as the basis of Psalm 113, verses 7 and 8, which shares Hannah's words from 1 Samuel 1:8. Raising from the dust the poor, from the ash heap lifting the needy, to make them sit down with nobles. In addition, Psalm 113 closely follows the themes of Hannah's psalm. In 1 Samuel 2:2, Hannah exults that there is no one like God. In Psalm 113:5, the psalmist asked, "Who is like God?" In 1 Samuel 2:5, Hannah testifies that the barren woman has given birth to 7 children. In Psalm 113:9, the psalmist testifies that God makes the barren woman a joyous mother of children. It cannot be established with certainty which came first. It is my preferred reading that Hannah's psalm came first and the psalm in the Psalter is based upon hers, but that is conjectural. Hannah's psalm and that of the anonymous psalmist do differ in that there is no enemy in the psalm. In 1 Samuel 1, Hannah celebrates her triumph over her enemy, Peninnah, although she does not name her. She says in verse 5 that the woman who has given birth to many children is forlorn. And Hannah may also be speaking to Peninnah when she says, "Do not speak so many great words, and do not let so much arrogance come from your mouths." Hannah uses the plural form of you in the suffix on mouth. I believe she's speaking to both Eli and Peninnah. Peninnah for taunting Hannah for so many years, and Eli for accusing her of drunkenness. Looking to the examples of Hannah and God establishing the word of her prayers, Psalm 113 may well have served as a prayer for infertile women and or a liturgy of thanksgiving upon successful delivery of a live child. The Psalm of the Blessed Virgin, the Magnificat, is also patterned after Hannah's psalm. The prayer of Miriam of Nazareth, better known by Anglicization and Gentilization, translating her name to Mary, is preserved in Luke 1:46 through 55. The opening versicle of praise in each psalm follows the same pattern. My heart, or my soul, exults in or magnifies the Holy One, and my strength, or my spirit, exalts in or rejoices in my God, or God my Savior. While it sounds like typical psalm language, that pattern does not occur in other psalms, even when substituting heart, soul, or spirit. In addition, the reversals that characterize Hannah's psalm are articulated in Mary's psalm. Miriam's prayer is built on the template of Hannah's prayer and not a generic psalm. In Hannah's prayer, the reversals span 1 Samuel chapter 2, verses 5 through 8. Those reversals include those who were at one time full, now hiring themselves out for food. Those who were hungry are now fat, the barren woman giving birth, while the woman who should have been happy with many children is miserable. Likewise, God has the power to kill and bring life, to cast someone down into Sheol and bring them up and out. And God raises the poor and needy from sitting in the dust to sitting with royalty. In Mary's psalm, the lowly are elevated while the powerful are tossed down from their seats of honor, and the hungry are filled while the rich are sent away empty in verses 52 through 53. Hannah's hymn of praise would be a fit conclusion to her story, but surprisingly, Hannah's story does not end with her delivery of Samuel and her deliverance from infertility and scorn. After Samuel takes up his new life and duties at the sanctuary, the narrator returns to Hannah, remembering her just as God has remembered her. In 1 Samuel chapter 2:19, Hannah continues her tender nurture of her child. Her attachment to her child is seemingly without precedent in the scriptures, which tend to dispose of mothering immediately after birthing, although some loose parallels may again be drawn between the stories of Moses and his mother. During each year, Hannah makes clothing for Samuel and then brings it to him on the annual feast day. This may well go on until he reaches maturity and his full adult height. Hannah may have lent him to her God, but Shmuel is still her child. Each year, Eli would bless Hannah and her husband that they might have more children together. There is no mention of the other woman and her children. Eli's blessings eventually prove potent as Hannah gives birth to 2 sons and 3 daughters. 2 daughters and 3 sons. None of these children recur in the scriptures. As the story follows, no further immediate mention is made of Samuel's family. In many ways, David and the nation become his sole concern. God and David are his primary relational partners, prompting one of my students to speculate that God was Samuel's beard, a suitable partner covering for an unsuitable partner. But it may be useful for the reader to remember that Samuel has a family of origin, and all of his policy decisions affect them. Hannah leaves quite a legacy in the scriptures and in liturgy. She lives through her Hellenized namesake in Tobit and Luke, and there's also a tradition that the mother of the Blessed Virgin was named Anne, which is Hannah. I am going to pass forward because I want to talk about Peninnah at the end. All of my hearings of the story of Hannah and Samuel, Peninnah has always been the villain. She's inscribed in the text as the other woman. Peninnah provokes the righteous Hannah because of her infertility, which she cannot control, vexing her. On the one hand, Peninnah represents the cultural norms of her people. On the other hand, she and her body belong to a man who uses her sexually, has children with her, but does not love her. Moreover, he publicly states his love for someone else. In some ways, the reading of Peninnah's story is dependent on whether one understands her to be the first or second wife. In a typical scenario, Hannah would have been the first wife and Peninnah taken on because of Hannah's infertility, which is supported by 1 Samuel 1:2, in which Peninnah is identified as the second. In this reading, Peninnah does what a faithful Israelite woman is supposed to do, bear children, particularly sons. She has produced at least an heir and a spare. Her daughters and sons must number at least 2 of each. The text does not say if Elkanah withdrew from Peninnah once Hannah conceived her first child. That would be extremely unlikely. He may have understood himself to owe her as many children as possible to counter high infant and child mortality and provide for her in her old age. Thus I read that Peninnah continued to faithfully produce children for Elkanah. She continued to welcome him into her bed like Leah of old in hopes that one day he would love her. The least likely possibility is that Peninnah was the first wife. This interpretation suggests that she in her fertility did not satisfy something in her husband, and he sought out another woman who was more to his liking. And when that new woman proved incompetent by the cultural standards at what was understood to be her basic duty, her husband did not discard her, but rather kept her and loved her, which enraged Peninnah with bitterness. This interpretation requires understanding the expression the one woman and the second as purely idiomatic and not sequential. Both Peninnah and Hannah live in an androcentric, regularly patriarchal society. They are each assessed by women and men alike on their ability to provide children and perhaps to a lesser degree on their physical appearance. In many ways, polygamy encourages competition. They play the game with the hand they are given. My Womanist Midrashic reading considers what would have happened if Hannah and Peninnah had found a way to change the game. Some time after giving birth to her second child for Elkanah, Peninnah realizes that he does not love her. He loves that other woman, Hannah, who has not done what a woman ought to do. So he keeps coming back to her bed, and to her thighs, because he knows she can do what a woman ought to do, and she will do it, but not anymore. Peninnah closes her heart and closes her thighs, and she opens her mouth. She tells him that she has done her duty. She has produced for him an heir and a spare. She will raise them, nurture them, love them, teach them, train them, but she will not add to them. When Elkanah returns to Hannah's bed, Frustrated that Peninnah has denied him access, he discovers that Peninnah has been there too. It is her voice that he hears in Hannah's mouth when she asks him, "If you love me so much more than 7 sons, why are you still slipping into her bed?" Having no answer, he withdraws, and for once, Hannah and Peninnah sleep in their own beds on their own terms. I will close with what this looks like in a sermon. Elkanah loved Hannah. Oh, I have preached this sermon. Elkanah loved Hannah, but he seems to have had no love for Peninnah. He commiserated with Hannah over the pain in her heart from the emptiness in her womb, and he demonstrated his love for her publicly. But more than that, he demonstrated his partiality and preference for her and her love, her hurts and her hopes, in Peninnah's face before God and everyone else when they went to worship. In biblical language, he put Peninnah to shame when she had done nothing wrong and everything right according to their shared cultural values and the patriarchal system she found herself trapped in. And so she acted out. She acted out against the one who symbolized her hurt, but not against the one whose power kept her in her hurt. That's how patriarchy and other systems of power work. They keep the people at the bottom fighting each other rather than joining together and fighting the systems that trap us, as the Reverend Dr. Renita Weems taught us in her analysis of Sarah and Hagar. If you asked Peninnah, she might have told you that she was willing to get by on the crumbs of love that fell from the table of Hannah and Elkanah's love. In fact, the gospel lesson with which this lesson is paired in the women's lectionary is the story of a woman begging Jesus for scraps like a dog under its master's table. In that story, what looks like stingy love for some soon becomes a full-throated, open-hearted love, embracing everyone and welcoming them to the table. Peninnah's story is a story of hard truths that look much more like the world in which we live today than Hannah's story. She teaches us that you can do what is right as far as you know how and still get your heart broken. She teaches that people with power will almost always choose power and use that power to get what they want, no matter who they hurt. And she teaches that no system of domination survives on the power of the powerful alone. Rather, patriarchy survives because patriarchal women embrace its bankrupt promises in order to get a little privilege, just as some Black people and people of many colors embrace white supremacist cultural values and biases in hope of granting the perilous protections of being counted as one of the good ones. And we have an extra 9 minutes and 27 seconds. You can find that sermon and many others on my website, willgafney.com.